They served cranberry sauce and character assassination in the same spoonful. Thaddeus Rourke here, 56, former internal auditor, now just a man with a bent brass key cooling beside lukewarm stuffing. Ever had dinner so tense you could hear the chandelier judging you? What's the most brutal thing your family said when the turkey hit the table? Thanksgiving used to smell like home nutmeg roasted skin, the slight burn of cloves from Mom overfilling the ham glaze. This year, it smelled like strategy. Every chair seemed placed for symmetry, not family. Every fork reflected someone's disappointment. I arrived late, or maybe just on time enough to be a problem. I wasn't on the seating chart, but Reuben's daughter slid over, giving up her chair with the ease of someone trained not to make waves. "Uncle Thad," she said, nodding toward the head of the table. "They saved you a spot." They hadn't. Mom looked up from her perfectly carved turkey breast and frowned. She held the carving knife like a scalpel, not a utensil. "Oh," she said with practiced indifference. "You came." I placed the bottle of Merlot I'd brought on the sideboard without ceremony. I had a calendar alert, I said. "Same one I've used since 2011. No one laughed. The chair next to Reuben creaked as I sat. Across from me, Reuben's Bible rested face down beside his water glass. He didn't touch it. He didn't touch me either, not with a handshake, not even with his eyes. The prayer was shorter than usual. No nod to the troops, no long-winded reference to our father's valor in the Gulf. Just thanks for health harvest and the humility to accept the Lord's truth. I'd barely salted my potatoes when I made my first mistake. "Next week," I said too casually, "I'll be testifying in front of the ethics subcommittee. Closed-door session, but they're finally digging into the old audit trails." Mom laid her fork down with surgical precision. "Why would they want you?" "Because I was there," I said when Noel and Byrne filed those off-books transfers. "I saw what they logged. I still have my access log." She held up a hand. "No, not tonight." She said it with the force of a gavel. "We are not going to spoil dinner with your delusions." "They're not delusions," I said quieter. "They're time-stamped." From the other end of the table, Reuben cleared his throat. He wasn't smiling anymore. "Thaddeus," he said in his Sunday voice, "this is a time for family, not ghosts." There it was. The word I hated more than any ghost. Reuben's son leaned toward his sister and whispered, "That's the uncle who used to work in Washington." She nodded like she was hearing a bedtime myth. I was folklore now. I forced a sip of water. It tasted like it came from a well of pity. Mom rose slowly, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked over to the sideboard. I thought she was fetching a pie or maybe her nerve. Instead, she pulled a small wooden box from behind the teacups. Her hands didn't shake. "You're not the first Rourke to fall," she said. "But you might be the only one who insists he was pushed." The lid clicked open. Inside was a napkin-wrapped item, thin and angular. She unwrapped it slowly, deliberately, and held it up for all to see. A brass key, long-necked, the same one I used to hang from my belt when I worked for the Department of Defense. It caught the light, and that's when I saw it. Bent, nearly folded in on itself. She walked over and without a word dropped it onto my plate. The metal clanged against the porcelain like a sentence passed. "This," she said, "was the key to your father's last secure vault. I kept it for you. I kept it because I believed one day you'd make us proud again." My stomach contracted. I reached for a napkin but stopped halfway. "I'm sorry you see me this way," I said, not rising, not begging. "But I don't need your key to be who I am." "Apparently not," she replied. "You've made a new name for yourself. Just not one we say out loud." I didn't touch the food again. Just picked up the bent key, folded it into my coat pocket, and stood. No one stopped me. No one asked me to stay. The room buzzed with the sound of chewing, everyone pretending nothing had happened. Everyone excellent at pretending. Outside, the night had gone damp. Porch lights flickered. As I stepped down the front walk, I glanced toward the curb. A black SUV idled across the street. No headlights. No plates. The driver didn't move. The engine purred like it had been there all evening. I walked past it without slowing, not looking back, but my hand tightened around the key in my coat pocket until the teeth bit into my palm. The key sat on my desk like it had an opinion. Bent ugly and stubborn, just like the year that had led me back to it. The brass caught the lamplight dull and blunted, casting a shadow shaped like a question mark. My apartment in DuPont Circle hadn't changed since I moved in 13 years ago. Same beige carpet that no amount of vacuuming could fully revive. Same fake wood blinds that rattled in the breeze. Same view of the brick wall of the Thai restaurant next door. But the silence felt newer tonight. Not peaceful, just sterile. Like a waiting room for someone who never showed. I slipped the key into my top drawer, careful not to let it snag on the loose paper clips and outdated fobs. Then I opened my laptop. The fan whirred to life like an old man rising from a deep chair. Encrypted drive unlocked. Audit folder opened. Empty. No logs, no reports, no witness statements, only metadata scars. Last modified July 11th, 2021. That was the day before I'd been told to take the summer off. The day before silence became the new policy. I leaned back, hand on my forehead. Somewhere Carl Belden's voice echoed from memory, in case of audit triple copy everything, and write it in ink, not pixels. Carl always smelled like stale coffee and pages torn from yellow legal pads. The man had a superstition about permanence he never trusted, clouds drives or anything that couldn't be filed in a metal drawer. I reached under my desk and pulled out an old banker's box, labeled 2007-2019. Dust plumed into the air like ash from a forgotten fire. Inside, beneath HR pamphlets and redundancy memos, lay a green spiral-bound notebook, creased bent at the corners and held shut with a rubber band turned brittle. I cracked it open. My handwriting looked older than I remembered. More deliberate. Each page began with initials, dates, ledger lines, anomalies. Page 12. Core David, dual entries flagged. Energy weapons R&D. Transfer approvals inconsistent SIG. Page 19. Flagged 31C cross-referencing shows signature stamped but not matched to any live credential. Core. I hadn't thought of him in 2 years. Lead engineer at the Advanced Systems Lab. Promoted twice, vanished once. I opened my browser and typed his name into the internal alumni directory. No records found. I tried LinkedIn. A few Davids, no cores. One account had existed. Now it just said, "This profile is no longer available." My fingers drummed the desk. My mind spun backward. Core had been nervous in our last meeting, fidgeted with his lanyard, avoided eye contact. He kept asking, "We good here, Mr. Rourke," like he was hoping I'd lie. The audit hadn't ended in a formal reprimand. It had simply ended. I scribbled new notes in the ledger, the ink smeared under my fingers. I didn't bother wiping it clean. The mess made it real. The email came just after midnight. No subject, no signature. Just one sentence. They buried the report. But you weren't wrong. I stared at the screen for a long time, then right-clicked, checked header info, and traced the IP. Baltimore. Specifically, a node pinged from Sand Hill Retirement Community, 30 minutes north of the city. I blinked at the address. Carl Belden. He was alive, and apparently still watching. I closed the laptop, set my palms flat on the notebook, and exhaled. The room was quiet, but not dead. Not anymore. The receptionist at St. Mary's greeted me like I was selling insurance, cheerful, suspicious, and ready to press a panic button. I signed in with a pen that refused to write unless you coaxed it into a stroke. Room 214 was at the far end of a hallway that smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and instant mashed potatoes. The walls were lined with oil paintings, lighthouses mostly standing stoic against imagined storms. Carl Belden was seated by the window reading a dog-eared paperback that had lost its cover. When I entered, he didn't flinch, just lifted his eyes, measured me for a second, and said, "Didn't expect you'd still have fight in you." "I didn't expect you'd still be vertical," I replied, then softened. "You look more patient than I remember." He grunted, marked his page with a gum wrapper, and gestured to the vinyl chair across from him. "These days, vertical is a victory." I sat. The gospel music looped softly from the hallway speakers, something about grace and forgiveness. Behind him, a framed plaque hung on the wall. Integrity first. No exceptions. The corner had yellowed from sunlight and time. "You found the note," he said. "I found more than that. My files are gone. Core's missing. Someone wiped everything clean." Carl nodded slowly. "They always do. Sloppy at first, then surgical. You kept anything." For a moment he didn't answer, just stared at his gnarled hands. The fingers trembled slightly, like antennae searching for signal. Then he reached into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt and pulled out a small black USB drive worn at the edges, wrapped in electrical tape. "This never left my pocket," he said. "Figured I'd die with it. But you're here and they're still scrubbing names." I took the drive carefully as if it might melt. It was warm. "What's on it?" "Fragments. Ledger scans. Security badges. A voice clip core, I think. Enough to start a fire, not enough to win the war." I turned it over in my palm. "You think they'll come after me?" He looked at me the way he did during my first audit briefing in 2008. Steady, unsentimental, protective. "They don't just erase reports," he said. "They erase people. Careers. Marriages. Sometimes entire units. Quiet. Legal clean. You won't hear a bullet. Just silence." I nodded, unable to respond. He leaned forward, his joints popping, and placed his hand on mine. His skin was thin and cool, but his grip still had iron in it. "Rorks don't vanish," he said. "Not all of us." The nurse knocked gently. "Mr. Belden, lunch." Carl didn't look away. "Let 'em wait." We sat there another full minute. Then I rose, slipped the USB into my coat's inner pocket, and thanked him, not just for the drive, but for still believing I wasn't crazy. On the train back to D.C., the window blurred with sleet and reflections. I plugged the USB into my laptop. The cursor spun. A prompt appeared, enter 4-digit code. I stared at it, fingers hovering above the keys. No hints. No security question. Only the silence of winter pressing against the glass. The envelope was waiting for me on the floor just inside the door, small off-white, thick enough to carry weight, but not menace. No return address. No seal. Just my name written in a hand I didn't recognize, but that felt rehearsed. I opened it, standing in the doorway, coat still wet from the rain. Inside was the key. The same one my mother had dropped on my plate 2 weeks ago, bent and bitter like her judgment. But now it was polished, clean. Its brass gleamed in the overhead light like it had been scrubbed with intent. It was folded into a note card, plain matte textured, one sentence center-aligned in small serif font, "Know your place." The heater rattled beside me like old bones shifting in their sockets. I shut the door slowly, locked it twice, and peeled off my coat with deliberate hands. Water from the hem pooled on the tile. On the security monitor above my bookshelf, one camera showed static gray-blue snow and nothing else. Basement entry. I hadn't noticed before, but the feed time-stamped the loss at 3 days ago. I'd been watched. Or worse, ignored. Back at my desk, I inserted Carl's USB again. This time I typed 0927 Core's daughter's birthday. He'd mentioned it once years ago when we worked late on a Friday and missed her school recital. The code blinked once, then unlocked. A low hum filled the speaker's static, barely audible. Then a voice. If it leaks, we isolate the source. Call it burnout. PTSD works. The sentence landed like a punch beneath the ribs. Male voice, flat, practiced. Followed by the sound of shuffling papers. Then a second voice. That's not enough. The Rourke file connects too many, someone'll dig. Then a cough. End of clip. I played it again. Slower. The mention of my name wasn't coincidence. It was confirmation. The cursor blinked. The heater clicked. Rain tapped against the windows like impatient fingers. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the bent key now resting on top of Carl's ledger. The contrast was sickening, honest ink and institutional threat side by side. My breath fogged the glass as I approached the window. The printer in room 3C still wheezed like it had phlegm. Same groan before every job, same rattle as it caught the page halfway through. I stood in front of it, posture casual, heart pacing like it remembered everything I didn't want it to. The air smelled of dry toner and warm plastic. Nothing had changed. Not the flickering light above the break room, not the crooked nameplate on the door to systems audit. Even the linoleum still peeled at the edge of the coffee machine. Someone had covered it with duct tape now, a fresh layer over old damage. An intern walked by clutching a tray of coffees. Didn't he get fired for something? She whispered to a colleague, not quietly enough. I kept my eyes on the printer, nodded at the paper tray like it had just told a good joke. Amanda spotted me first. She was new, young, alert, polite, the way you are when you're not sure if someone outranks you. "Can I help you?" she asked. I pulled out the lanyard I'd resurrected for the day. It said, Consulting Legacy Review, printed in that DOD blue that meant nothing but looked official. Picking up some archival material for the audit review board, I said. She blinked. Nobody told me we had visitors today. They rarely do. It was just enough ambiguity to make her hesitate. Then she smiled, awkward but respectful, and stepped aside. The station I needed was near the back. Fewer eyes. I slotted the USB into the machine as casually as one might plug in a mouse. It felt warm from the train ride from the coat pocket it had nestled in for days. The screen blinked once. File directory opened. Belden, recordings, Orion, meeting, AUD 099, wave. I clicked it volume low. There was the voice again. If it leaks, we isolate the source. Call it burnout. PTSD works. Another voice. Acceptable loss. Then Rourke's name is still attached. Scrub it or bury the entire line item. The printer coughed to life, spitting out a transcript I'd formatted in WordPad double-spaced, monospaced font plain. I scanned the hallway. Amanda was on a callback turned. A cubicle light blinked once, then went dark. I saved a backup to a hidden folder on my encrypted drive and yanked the USB. Then I left. No alarms, no yelling. Only the soft echo of my shoes on linoleum and the quiet sense that I was finally walking forward. Outside, winter had softened to drizzle, the kind that soaks you slowly, like doubt. The black SUV was waiting again, parked in the same shadowed corner it had used before, but this time the passenger door opened. A man stepped out, trim haircut, overcoat sharp, pin on his lapel too small to read, too distinct to ignore. Homeland or internal affairs? Maybe both. He walked up to me, not hurried. Looked me in the eye, then saluted clean, crisp military standard. The kind you didn't give to civilians. "Sir," he said, "I've read your audit. They're afraid." I didn't answer. Not yet. I wasn't used to being believed this quickly. He reached into his pocket and handed me a small black burner phone, still in its packaging. "They've moved the hearing to Monday. 0800 sharp. That's your window." I nodded slowly. He didn't wait for thanks. Back in the SUV, the door shut with a click that felt surgical. Then it melted into traffic like it had never stopped. I stood there, transcript in hand, the phone cool in my palm. 3 years ago, I'd been told to take a long-needed break. Today, they called me sir. Sometimes the past doesn't come back. Sometimes you bring it with you. A man stood across the street beneath a street lamp. Long coat, upright posture. He didn't wave, he saluted. Clean, precise, like a man trained to recognize hierarchy even in silence. I hadn't worn a badge in 5 years, no insignia, no clearance, but he knew who I was. I stepped back instinctively, but didn't break eye contact. He didn't move, didn't wait for response. Then my phone buzzed. New message. Unknown number. They'll move on you soon. Be ready. I sat down slowly. The rain had turned to sleet. The room smelled like old carpet, and something else like warm metal left too long in the hand. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid, but because the ledger wasn't finished, and I hadn't found the last name on the list. My mother didn't come. She said the Rourkes don't show up for public shaming, even if it's your kind of patriotism. But she sent flowers. Carnations red, white, and blue in a plastic vase that barely stood upright. Tucked inside a plain card for your version of the truth. I left them in the prep room. I couldn't bring them into the chamber. The Capitol Police don't like symbols without permission. I opened the small felt box instead. inside the brass key. Straightened, smoothed along the edges its bend, now nothing more than a faint scar across its neck. I ran my thumb over the ridge one last time, then slipped it into the inside pocket of my blazer. They called my name. The chamber was larger than I remembered. Senate Hearing Room 216, walls too white, lighting too blue, seats too full. I took my place before the Armed Services Committee, raised my right hand, and swore to tell the truth. And then I told them everything. I spoke slowly, deliberately. Years of silence had sharpened each sentence like a chisel. I described the Orion contracts, the audit files erased, the voice on the USB, the meeting minutes that never made it into official logs. I told them how David Corr disappeared, how Carl Belden aged in obscurity with a drive in his pocket and guilt in his lungs. Then I submitted the transcript, the one I'd printed from that wheezing machine in room 3C. The committee chair nodded to a technician. The audio filled the room. If it leaks, we isolate the source. Call it burnout. PTSD works. Not flinched. Senator Halverson leaned in. Who authorized that statement? Mr. Not looked down. I can't confirm the source. I stood, reached into my coat, pulled out the key now polished glinting under the hearing room's cruel lights. This, I said, opened the vault that housed those reports. It still does. I walked to the evidence table and placed it beside the transcript. The clerk stepped forward, took the key, and unlocked a narrow metal case just behind the dais. Inside were printed reports, hard-bound audit logs, my handwritten ledger page by page. They matched my testimony line for line. No edits. No gaps. Even the committee's own time-stamped notes showed alignment. The room went quiet. No coughing. No shuffling of papers. Not even the click of a pen. Knott didn't speak again. One senator, a man whose name I hadn't caught before, cleared his throat. "Mr. Rourke," he said. "Thank you for not walking away." I nodded. I didn't trust myself to speak just then. As I gathered my notes and turned to leave, I noticed the back row had filled. Hazel Rourke was there. Hair pinned back, same dress she wore to my father's funeral, back straight, eyes unreadable. Just beyond the door near the hallway exit, the same bodyguard stood. Black coat, neutral expression. This time in front of a full chamber and at least 2 news cameras, he raised his hand in salute. Not rushed, not hesitant. A clean, formal gesture. I hadn't received one like that in years. My mother saw it. Her eyes didn't change, but her hand moved slowly to the edge of her purse, fingers tightening. Outside, the February air bit clean and sharp. The world hadn't shifted, but maybe the table had. My mother didn't come. She said the Rourkes don't show up for public shaming, even if it's your kind of patriotism. But she sent flowers. Carnations, red, white, and blue in a plastic vase that barely stood upright. Tucked inside a plain card for your version of the truth. I left them in the prep room. I couldn't bring them into the chamber. The Capitol Police don't like symbols without permission. I opened the small felt box instead. Inside the brass key, straightened, smoothed along the edges, its bend now nothing more than a faint scar across its neck. I ran my thumb over the ridge one last time, then slipped it into the inside pocket of my blazer. They called my name. The chamber was larger than I remembered. Senate Hearing Room 216, walls too white, lighting too blue, seats too full. I took my place before the Armed Services Committee, raised my right hand, and swore to tell the truth. And then I told them everything. I spoke slowly, deliberately. Years of silence had sharpened each sentence like a chisel. I described the Orion contracts, the audit files erased, the voice on the USB, the meeting minutes that never made it into official logs. I told them how David Corr disappeared, how Carl Belden aged in obscurity with a drive in his pocket and guilt in his lungs. Then I submitted the transcript, the one I'd printed from that wheezing machine in room 3C. The committee chair nodded to a technician. The audio filled the room. If it leaks, we isolate the source. Call it burnout. PTSD works. Not flinched. Senator Halverson leaned in. Who authorized that statement? Mr. Knott. Knott looked down. I can't confirm the source. I stood, reached into my coat, pulled out the key, now polished, glinting under the hearing room's cruel lights. This, I said, opened the vault that housed those reports. It still does. I walked to the evidence table and placed it beside the transcript. The clerk stepped forward, took the key, and unlocked a narrow metal case just behind the dais. Inside were printed reports, hardbound audit logs, my handwritten ledger page by page. They matched my testimony line for line. No edits, no gaps. Even the committee's own time-stamped notes showed alignment. The room went quiet. No coughing, no shuffling of papers, not even the click of a pen. Knott didn't speak again. One senator, a man whose name I hadn't caught before, cleared his throat. Mr. Rourke, he said. Thank you for not walking away. I nodded. I didn't trust myself to speak just then. As I gathered my notes and turned to leave, I noticed the back row had filled. Hazel Rourke was there, hair pinned back. Same dress she wore to my father's funeral, back straight, eyes unreadable. Just beyond the door near the hallway exit, the same bodyguard stood, black coat, neutral expression. This time, in front of a full chamber and at least 2 news cameras, he raised his hand in salute. Not rushed, not hesitant. A clean, formal gesture. I hadn't received one like that in years. My mother saw it. Her eyes didn't change, but her hand moved slowly to the edge of her purse, fingers tightening. Outside, the February air bit clean and sharp. The world hadn't shifted, but maybe the table had. It arrived in the mail bin by the Institute's front desk. No return address, no markings, just an off-white envelope among catalogs and training forms. Inside a single sheet of ivory paper, typed not signed. You stood alone. I watched. That was it. No apology, no warmth, just silence given shape. But at the bottom corner, faint and crimson, a ring left by a wine glass. The kind my mother always favored, too full too early in the day when she was nervous. I slipped it into my coat pocket and walked toward Lecture Hall A. The coffee from the vending machine still tasted like scorched regret. I drank it anyway. First day, first class. Ethics 101. Applied Oversight and Responsibility. They'd asked me to open the session with something memorable but not dramatic, so I started with the quietest sentence I knew. Courage. I said facing 25 young faces isn't always loud. Sometimes it's on page 74 of an audit document, and it waits 3 fiscal years to be noticed. They smiled. A few laughed. but one near the back leaned forward like he knew what page 74 meant. His name was Brady. Looked about 22. Eyes clear, mouth quick. Reminded me too much of myself. Ambitious. Restless. Idealistic in a way that hadn't yet been tested. I chalked the word persistence on the board. The P squeaked against the green surface, thin and uncertain. After class, Brady lingered. He asked, "What if the people who doubt you are your own family?" I didn't have a clean answer. Not the kind you give in a lecture hall. So I said, "Then you build a new one." He didn't blink, just nodded slowly like he already knew he might have to. As the room cleared, I caught sight of someone through the narrow glass panel in the door. Hazel. My mother stood just outside. Not in the center, not directly facing me, but angled like a person who couldn't decide whether to leave or lean in. We held each other's gaze through the barrier. Then she turned and walked away. No knock. No word. The red wine ring on the letter made more sense now. As I gathered my notes, Carl appeared quiet as usual, somehow already seated at the back without me noticing. His grey cardigan matched the walls. He walked forward slowly, cane tapping with steady rhythm. He handed me another envelope. This one official. He didn't explain. Inside was a draft policy memo. Rourke Clause. DOD Draft Language Protection of Whistleblower Audit Trails. I didn't speak. Neither did he. He just gave a slight nod and walked out, leaving me with the letter, the law, and the faint echo of his shoes on the tile. The Capitol dome caught the early light like it was made of something softer than gold, something earned, not mined. I watched it from a small stone bench just outside Memorial Hall. Below the dome, a fresh plaque gleamed under the sun. Rourke Clause ratified, March 2024. That word Rourke never looked heavier. Or lighter. The ceremony hadn't started yet. A small crowd milled near the entrance, local press, a few veterans scattered staffers with clipboards. I saw my brother standing at the back. Reuben didn't approach, but his presence was louder than any speech. Hazel wasn't there. Not here, at least. But I'd seen her earlier through the arch of St. Agnes, just across the street, lighting a candle beneath the stained glass of St. Michael the Defender. She didn't turn when I passed. She didn't need to. A gentle breeze lifted the edge of my coat. The grass still held the night's drizzle soaking through the heels of people walking across the lawn, including Brady. His black flats darkened, but he didn't seem to notice. He stood just behind the podium, clutching a folder thicker than his arm. I stepped forward when called. No teleprompter. Just a folded note card in my pocket, never pulled out. I used to think truth would clear the table, I said. That it would fix the chairs, sweep the floor, restore what was broken. I paused. But truth doesn't fix. It costs. And lies. They lease your soul a little at a time. Today I've paid what I could. The rest is yours. I stepped down. No anthem. No cannon salute. Just applause, polite, warm, unsustained. The kind that doesn't need to last to be real. As I walked back toward the side steps, a hand tugged gently at my coat. My nephew. Reuben's boy. I still didn't know his name by heart. He said, "Mom said you were brave, even if she doesn't say it to your face." I nodded. That was enough. Brady caught up to me by the hedgerow papers, still tucked under one arm. I reached into my satchel and pulled out the old green notebook edges, curled pages full of initials. Ink bleed pressure marks. I handed it to her. This helped me remember what mattered, I said. She didn't answer, just ran a finger along the spine like she already knew its weight. Down the hill, the bell at St. Agnes rang once. Not for ceremony, just time. As I walked away, my coat shifted. Pinned to my chest now, just beneath the lapel, the brass key caught the light. It had no lock to open anymore, but it didn't need one. Sometimes what matters isn't what the key unlocks. It's who knows you still carry it. The sun hit the Capitol dome just right that morning, but what I remember most was the soft gleam of the old brass key on my chest, polished, pinned, finally at peace. Not a tool anymore, a symbol I no longer needed to hide. We don't always get to fix what breaks, but we can carry the proof that we tried. Sometimes justice is quiet, and healing doesn't ask for applause. Maybe you've carried something bent for too long, too. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? Share it in the comments or pass this along to someone who might need theirs.